Let's see. What did you think of the G.I. Joe movie Rise of Cobra? You have my condolences. Could you please give us some insight into the creation of some action figures like Jinx, Bats, or Leatherneck, who is based on Ron Rudett? Well, that's fun. Jinx, we were just talking about that figure, and one of the rare female figures. Bats is a figure that came about in a conversation at lunch with Roger Avery when he came down to New York. At that time, I was also working with American Banknote on holographic securities. If you have a Visa credit card, the dove that you see on the hologram, which is an anti-counterfeiting device, was one of my sculpts, as was the cover of National Geographic in March of 1984, where most people saw a hologram for the very first time. At lunch, I had suggested to Roger a Cobra character, an android character, with an application of a hologram on the chest that would reveal the inner workings of the machinery, that could be done. He loved the idea, and I put him in contact with the people I'd been working with at American Banknote. So what happened is the idea was a great idea, but what became of it was twofold. One was the figure was produced, Bats was produced as an android character, but the hologram was replaced with what we call a lenticular. Well, the lenticular is a corrugated piece of plastic that prismatically splits the image, creating the illusion of a third dimension. This is sort of like the portraits of Jesus whose eyes follow you about the room. And so it's about as disturbing as that. But it worked very well. And the holograms were bypassed at that time because of the cost to Hasbro. Hasbro felt that the individual cost of a hologram would put them beyond their price point at that time. However, a few years later, what became of that was evolved into Visionaries, which was this science fiction fantasy. They learned nothing from Krull, so they went on and did Visionaries. And there I was employed, as I told you earlier, to do the miniature sculpts that would become the holographic foils. The reason for that, by the way, is holographic foils at that time the hologram did not function the way a photograph functions. You could not reduce the image, and so the Visa Dove is exactly, the sculpt is exactly the same size as the holographic foil. And therefore, to make these very small heraldries that went onto the shields and onto the breastplates of the characters required somebody who was used to working very small. And this was my particular specialty. So where I didn't do any of the figures, I did do quite a number of the holograms. And let's see, so what else can we talk about here? Leatherneck. Ron Rudett. Ron Rudett is a big guy. He is, well, I'm saying, I'm going back now more than 20 years to say that about Ron, because I haven't seen Ron in that length of time. But Ron is approximately my height, maybe a little bit bigger or smaller. I'm 6'2", and he is a big guy. Okay, so the question came up: what are we going to do about the bucks? You know, are we going to sculpt Ron as he really is? You know, the most powerful G.I. Joe you've ever seen. Well, we you'll pardon the pun, we toyed around with that idea, but we just came up with doing his portrait for Leatherneck. So that was a period when we were doing people who worked within the company, because by that time everybody was damn bored and was looking for something to entertain themselves. So there were quite a number of figures I did from Polaroids, and some people I knew who they were, and many of them to this day I don't know who they were. But if you have a G.I. Joe that has a face that looks like it might be real, it's real. Okay, there really is a guy out there, although you have to keep in mind he's now 20 years older and probably doesn't look like his G.I. Joe anymore. Let's see, let's move on. Are there any characters that stick out in your mind as memorable and for whatever reasons? Yeah, I'm going to jump down the list here because there was an experience that I had which is quite fascinating to me, at least. You be your own judge. I did a character. What is the character's name? Oh gosh, give me a moment. Zartan. Zartan was the master of disguise, and he's a Cobra character. And he had in his kit, he had a backpack that contained a face mask. And the face mask, and this comes up in a question later, so we'll skip it. It wasn't a face mask that was modeled after anybody. It was a generic face, but it happened to have a beard and a mustache, which is also something that I had at the time. But it was not a portrait of me. Okay, so that is one of the questions that comes later, is who is that a portrait of? It is just a generic head. So as I told you earlier, when we do a G.I. Joe sculpt, it takes a full year before it comes out on the market. And when I was living in Flushing, Queens, Flushing evolved a wonderful Asian district in the center of Flushing. In New York City, we refer to those as Chinatowns. And one day I was walking down there because one of the things that I like to do is to cook, and I love Asian vegetables and I like to cook Asian food. So I was down there on a shopping trip, and I was going down a side street, and there were a group of children playing, and I think the oldest would have been around 8 or 9, and the youngest was probably about 6. And they were playing war games with no particular props. They didn't have any toys to play with, but they were shooting with their fingers, you know. That's what we used in the old days. Okay, we used to use our fingers. And he turned around and he looked at me walking down the street, and here I was, this Caucasian guy with a beard and a mustache. And he looked up at me and held his hand out like that and went, "Dan Dan, Zartan, bang, 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 bang." I clutched my chest automatically. I was deeply wounded, and I staggered past him. So I wanted him to know that he had created great injury, if not mortality, by his actions. And as I recovered from that, as I continued to walk down the block, I realized what he said, that he called me Zartan. And I thought to myself, my God, that child doesn't know who he just killed. He just killed the guy who sculpted Zartan. So after that, when I'd be in Manhattan, I'd be walking down the street, and we have, there's a constant flow of humanity on the streets of Manhattan. It's very much like Soylent Green now. And you just don't know, because we live in such an anonymous world, who we're passing in crowds, who's out there that is a part of your life in a significant way. And so you just don't take those things for granted. It was a wonderful little life lesson, and I don't know that youngster would now be a fully grown adult, and I remember that very well. I don't know if you'll see this, but I swear to you, one day I'll get you. All right, well, we're going to take a little break here. There's some ice cream waiting for us. And so we're going to come back on the next tape and continue this conversation. Thank you.